Right, welcome back to Unplug Health Series, post Easter,
Episode 273.
episode something or other, and today we're talking all things blood and blood sugar levels, glucose levels. This actually is following on from a discussion I had earlier in the week with a patient of ours who was asking about the concept of using blood sugar levels and measuring blood sugar levels on a regular basis through the day as an indicator or a way to manage health and manage diet, not from a weight perspective, but from an energy perspective and that. So I thought I would also pose that same question and start that as a discussion with Ollie today, purely because I know Ollie has done a lot of work and works a lot more with clients than I do, specifically with blood sugar levels. And at times I've had to watch how I adjust Ollie because he's had a sensor on and all sorts. So without having to reinvent the wheel as such, I was interested to know what your experience of that and how you use it and go from there, really.
I think when we actually look at health, we look at so many things that are going on around nowadays, that there's higher diagnosis of ADHD, ADD, there's migraines, there's brain fog, there's sleep problems, there's stress, and loads of things that happen in our body. We could usually trace a lot of them back to poor blood glucose management.
Yeah, and blood glucose management is almost like a window into a whole lot of other issues, from cortisol to sleep patterns and everything.
Exactly, and it's the foundation of when I work with clients that we look to test glucose. Do we have a 24-hour glucose monitor like a Freestyle Libre, which are not the cheapest? They're like about £50 and you can get them prescribed for 2 weeks. Or do you have a finger prick test where it's a glucometer, you test it, and there's pros and cons for each one?
So what are you looking for? So you get someone to measure the levels. Obviously the levels aren't going to be stable. Mm-hmm. As what this client was saying is like, oh, my goal is to have stable levels. And I was saying to her, well, you're going to find it interesting because you're also going to see of how much they change, particularly when you eat, and how you're eating, or your stress levels and that. So you're going to gain more information. Yep. But she was coming straight from the element of she wanted to change her diet of like, I want to eat little and often to keep my blood sugar levels stable the whole time. Do you prescribe to that element of assessing it, or you start off with just let's see what your levels are? What does a patient gain, or you gain from regularly measuring glucose, say, for a couple of weeks?
Depends on symptoms, really. If someone comes to me, serious brain fog, dips in energy, having to rely on caffeine, they're struggling to get to sleep, struggling to stay asleep, or waking, needing the caffeine, then they're signs where we would look at blood glucose. Yep. Now, it depends if that person's glucose is all over the show, up and down. Is it just running high all the time? Is it running low? And is it
was running high at certain times of the day?
Hyperglycemia, hypoglycemia. Then we go into the roots of like serious problems with adrenal, when we have reactive hypoglycemia. And then we get issues there. So I look at how steady is it, because we do want it steady, but there's also the awareness of that even if we have a low sugar meal, a protein or fat based meal, it's going to go up a little bit. So we want a steady baseline. And actually where I want it for a client for optimal brain function, for lowering anxiety, getting rid of brain fog, all these sorts of things, is between 4.2 and 4.9 fasted, first thing in the morning. Now, when we eat, it's going to go up. And what I do with people, if they're doing a manual test, is 20 minutes before a meal. Not every meal, 20 minutes before to see where it's at. 20 minutes after to see where it goes from that meal. And then 1 hour, 2 hours afterwards to see where it goes to. So we should see it go up. That's where it is 20 minutes after. And then come back to where it was before.
A lot of people talk around the two-hour window of within 2 hours after the meal having it
back to like nice and steady. Yeah. And
so it's a bit like heart rate, is that a variable heart rate doesn't always mean there's an issue with the heart. It sometimes can be an issue with how you're running your life, but you're using the heart rhythm, or how well the heart can return back to normal after stress or exercise
Yep.
is an indicator of cardiovascular health. It doesn't necessarily mean that someone necessarily has a problem with their diet, but it can be that they have other issues in their life
It's
which are
linked,
affecting
like,
that.
with glucose is linked to being overweight. It's linked to diabetes, and you don't have to be overweight to have poor blood glucose management. I've seen very, very lean people in good aesthetic shape that have had poor blood glucose management. I bet if I tested
I've got patients who are diabetic who you'd say are ideal weight or look, they're not.
If I tested mine when I used to compete in bodybuilding, I bet it would have been all over the show.
Yeah.
But what we have to look at is that every time it spikes high, our body needs to release insulin to grab that sugar and take it into the cell. We do that too much, we then get resistant to it. Like insulin isn't able to do its job, or we can't release enough of it. And once it drops down, the body then gets confused and there's mixed signals sent. So it pushes the insulin down or the sugar levels down too low. Then we have to release cortisol, which spikes it up, which is a stress on the body. Now, each time we have this stress, it's a stress on the gut lining as well, and the enteric nervous system, the nervous system around the gut. So we then release cortisol, it's a stress on the body. So we stop digesting food the way we want. We know it's going to send like signals to the adrenals to release adrenaline, and then we get into the fight or flight mode.
So yeah, I mean, that's a big one, isn't it? And especially in the modern day life of chronic stress. Blood sugar level regulation is very heavily associated with adrenal function, and then also it feeds us into sleep patterns and cortisol and melatonin. So it is a very interesting window.
It's a very interesting window, and
I think also it's quite interesting when people do it it's actually seeing what your blood sugar levels does after a meal
and exercise.
Yeah,
because we see a lot of times with people. So if I have someone who can't sleep during the night, they're waking up 2-3 times to go to the toilet, and it's not because of a weak bladder, it's because of cortisol, it's because of stress, it's because of poor blood glucose management, and they're working out in the evening, I'll get them to, if they can't work out earlier, I'll get them to take a couple of weeks off the gym and see the difference.
Yeah,
because 5 hours before bedtime, we have melatonin, the sleep hormone, start to be built up to its peak. Now that's usually around 10:30-ish sort of time. If we have a spike in cortisol in that 5 hours, so from 5 o'clock till 10 o'clock, that then blunts that melatonin release and we have to restart it. Now, if we're going to the gym, we release cortisol. If you have road rage on the way home, if you have an argument with your partner, or things that can cause stress, as if we're looking at the screens too late and we have exposure to blue light, which then makes our brain think it's time to wake up, like it's sunlight, there's a release of cortisol. So we can see all these different things when we have poor blood glucose management, and you're checking it with a freestyle Libra on your arm, or I'm sure there's other makes of constant glucose meters out there, or you're testing it, then it's interesting to see what happens, because people will spike it up when they exercise and then it doesn't drop, but they haven't got good clearance. So then it doesn't drop, so then they're wide awake. So they'd be better off to have morning workouts. But also an interesting one, I had a client that...
So you're saying like if someone exercises and you same as if the equivalent of someone eats something that goes up, you're also interested in how quickly the body gets back.
Hence we want to look at exercise intensity, and I see a lot of people smashing workouts, loads of functional fitness, CrossFit, or doing sprint training when they're running, or like they get very competitive with themselves.
Yeah.
And I have definitely been in that. You've seen me in that part where it's not good for us.
Yeah.
Like working and smashing these workouts at 6, 7, 8 p.m.
a system which is already burnt out.
Yeah. And then also a client of mine got multiple staff members, and he sent me his glucose levels, and we've gotten a conversation about he had to sack one of his staff members. Freelancer, wasn't like it was getting rid of her, basically. He gave her some notice, and it was stressful. And I said, was that at 4:45 p.m? How did you know that? Well, there was a spike at 5 p.m.
Yeah.
And those stresses that we have, it's that quick release of epinephrine, of adrenaline. Then there's the cortisol release, which is a little bit slower. But then that spikes
Yeah.
the glucose. So
And
if we're stressed, we're going to crave more food.
I suppose also the benefit of that, if clients can see that and then they can understand, they also become aware more of the holistic element of their life and how that affects everything. Whereas a lot of people, when you mention, it's a bit like people when you say to people, do you have much sugar in your diet? And they go, no, I don't have any sugar in my tea or coffee. And they don't grasp the whole concept of sugar comes from a lot of, all carbohydrates go to sugar. I think when you talk about blood sugar level and blood sugar management, people instantly think about sugary diet, not all these other lifestyle things that
rice, oats.
Well, and
potatoes
not only purely diet, but the fact, as you say, like exercise, sleep patterns, other stresses
Exercise, it
can
breaks
affect
it down, right?
your efficiency of how your blood sugar levels are regulated.
Just overall management of the stress.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
one of the things that I see, and we just had a quick touch on it when we were chatting in the adjustment room, is that we see a lot of people going down the intermittent fasting route. Now, if anyone doesn't know what intermittent fasting is, it's basically where you have a window of not eating and then a window of eating. And one of the more popular one is 16 hours of fasting, 8 hours of eating. So 16-8, you might have 20 hours of fasting, 4 hours of eating, and so on. And it's very much publicized that it's really good for blood glucose management and really good for health. But I've seen people that have poor blood glucose management make it worse by having this fasting period, and we cut it down. Women in particular have worse blood glucose management because of the hormonal balance than guys, and especially when it comes to the time of their period where they are on their menstrual cycle, there's more craving of sugar. So then our body's craving it, we have then worse blood glucose management, and then we're trying to fast. The stress happens of waiting hours. It's not 12 hours, 14 hours.
Yeah.
And then it makes it worse. So actually, like those little and often with the right composition can work you towards getting intermittent fasting. We go straight into it because it's the thing to do, just like ketogenic was or vegan or whatever it was. Like that can cause more harm than good, especially like looking at someone's health history.
And also the other thing I was looking at the other day, there was an article about fasting, 2 days or so a week looking to fast. And the interesting thing was that so this article spoke about fasting being a 12-hour time frame. So they were advocating that twice a week you would have a 12-hour window where you didn't eat. So that it gave they were saying it kind of gave the body, the system, a chance to regulate the blood sugar levels as opposed to eating all the time. And they then said that 12-hour time frame could be any time of the day,
when you're sleeping. Yeah.
So, and then they said most people do that when you sleep. So I said, okay, well, 12 hours. So what does it actually look like as in implementing it? So well, that's like 8 till 8 or 6 until 6, depending on what. So I thought, well, that's fairly straightforward to do. But then the article went through to saying that some people find that really tough. And I thought, well, that says something about our habits, is that for some people to not eat something, say from 8 o'clock at night through till 8 o'clock in the morning.
Well, not necessarily just about habits, but
what I'm leading towards is the concept of someone will have something to eat. So they go to bed at 11 o'clock, they'll have something to eat between 8 and 11.
Or a cup of tea, whatever it is.
Or if they get up at, say, 6:30, they will have something before that 8 o'clock. So it made you realize that for a lot of people, their daily routine and habits, they probably going from 7, 8. If you look at not everyone sleeping 8, 9, 10 hours, a lot of people are probably going 6, 7, 8 hours away between a meal.
Well, how many people actually can sleep 8 hours without waking up?
Yeah.
And I done a talk at the Norfolk Club, and there were 75. There's a business leaders lunch, and 75 people there. And I thought, this could go one or two ways, this little trial thing I'm going to do. Got everyone to stand up, which was a mistake because I'm short. So I'm like, well, I am still here. But I said that...
You can't see me.
Yeah, you can't just listen to me. First off, I want you to sit down if you've had times regularly where you struggle to get to sleep at night. A lot of people sat down. And then I said, I want you now to sit down. If you wake up during the night to go to the toilet regularly, once a night, twice a night,
it's a
3 times
really
a night.
interesting one, that one, yeah.
Most people sat down. And then the third one was, if you wake up and you are not yourself until you grab your coffee, but then you have afternoon energy dips and suffer from brain fog. 2 people were left standing, or 3 people, including myself. And
It's interesting, isn't it?
it's
Yeah.
actually those 2 people, one of them I know personally, should have really sat down because of our conversations that we've had. And it made me just realize that's 74 out of 75 people that are suffering from that. Was the other person the egotistical guy that's in there that didn't want to admit it? Because there's always going to be one of them.
Yeah.
I used to be that guy.
Well, I must be all right.
Yeah, and then we don't want to see it. It's the self-awareness. But I would say that if we were to, I'm going to use the term pandemic, if we were to look at a real pandemic now, it's sleep and poor blood glucose management.
Thanks for joining us in part 1 of this podcast on blood sugar levels. Look out for part 2 wherever you hooked up to join this podcast.